Welcome back to Down the Road. Scott Skokos is going to join us. Skokos, I'm sorry. Scott is the executive director of the North Dakota Resource Council, the Dakota Resource Council. Scott, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
I want to talk to you a little bit about utility bills. There's some people that are mad about this, that don't think this is going in a fair way. Have you heard that, Scott?
Yes, several of our members have been affected by this at Dakota Resource Council, and generally anybody who is a member of, or gets their bill from an investor-owned utility like MDU or Xcel, for example, in North Dakota. And the reason that the bills are going up is because the bill is coming due for the natural gas prices that were paid during the Texas cold snap, where essentially the grid in Texas went down for a myriad of reasons, mainly due to deregulation. And as a result, now the bill is due for those extremely high gas prices that are a result of that situation.
Okay, so I want to understand this. Texas has its own grid. They don't want to be part of a larger body when it comes to delivering power. They want that Texas independence. And then what happens? Well, we saw exactly what happens. They take the profit, but they don't put into the infrastructure. So they goof up. We don't goof up, they do. So I got to ask the question, why the heck am I paying their bar tab?
It's mainly because they were allowed to do that. I think they're like what this shows in some ways. I'm not always one for lots of federal oversight on things, but this requires, in my opinion, regional or federal oversight onto that grid. For example, North Dakota is a part of two different grids. One is the Midwest Independent System Operator, which is MISO, and then also the Southwest Power Pool. And those are both regionally operated power grids, essentially, that operate in a way where they have minimum standards for the utilities. One, like weatherization. What happened in Texas was they did not weatherize their fossil fuel infrastructure and others, as well as their renewables. And as a result, you saw underperformance and freezing, which then caused it so you could not get natural gas to market. And the limited supply of natural gas then went up because Texas represents about 25 to 30% of the natural gas in the United States. So when that amount of natural gas goes down, then you have spot market prices that just skyrocket. And as a result, you have utilities like Xcel having to buy on the spot market to heat homes because they have contracts that requires them to.
Interesting. And so Texas isn't buying, everything's down. And in the end, we end up paying the price for it. I just, and you can have a U.S. senator that in the middle of it all, where people were freezing and they were, their meat was rotting in the deep freeze, he decides to go on a vacation to a western part of Mexico during a pandemic. I mean, that's how utterly ridiculous this is. And we're the ones that end up sitting there looking at a higher bill. How much higher, across the board average are people looking at paying because of this?
I think in North Dakota, what I've seen, and I don't have these numbers exact, but it's between $7 and $10 a month over a 10 to 15 month period. I think it's different depending on which utility. Xcel, I think your base rates for gas went up by about $7 a month. It especially affects what we've seen is people who own apartment properties or duplexes that aren't like large corporate people that have contracts. So like your mom and pop renters. That rent out their complexes to people now have to pay higher bills because they didn't have a firm price. So they're disproportionately affected by this. The average household is going to get a larger bill over a 15-month period, essentially, to pay for the bill. Like, for example, in Minnesota, though, on the other side of the river, you're seeing an $800 million bill that's coming due. And that's going to raise utility rates in Minnesota a lot more than North Dakota. So we're somewhat shielded from this, but we're also experiencing it. But not as bad as other states.
Is there any movement out there, Scott, because they have been left alone in Texas, but now we're all seeing the price we pay for how they manage their power grid. Is there any movement to bring Texas into the fold, to have it be regulated, to have it be something similar to what we do with our Public Service Commission and other things, whether it's your local co-op and the members making determinations? But is there any movement to make sure this doesn't happen again?
I think that's something that we'll be seeing from the federal level. There's like two schools of thought on this. One is we need more federal and regional oversight on their grid in Texas so that we can ensure that the deregulation policies that happen don't cause the same situation that we're having right now. And then the other side, unfortunately, they're instead blaming renewables for this when it's actually a systems problem. So you see, for example, our senators and actually the governor of Texas at one point blaming renewables and then recanting that statement. So I think there's like two schools of thought here: is that Texas can fix it itself, and then the other side is we need to step in and force Texas to do this. One thing that we are seeing after all this that's interesting is that the utilities are actually recognizing that they need to do more battery storage so that they have backup. And they're working on weatherization as well in Texas. But I think without a broader push from outside, I don't think Texas is going to do what's necessary, because obviously everything's about bottom line, and they've already had a deregulated system. So there's going to have to be pressure from the outside, if that's from Congress, if that's from other governors in other states and utilities, things like that. So
let me get back to Texas for 1 second, though. You said they recanted on the whole renewables issue. It's like they woke up in the morning, Governor Abbott and everyone else, the cruises of the world, and they decided, man, oil's been writing the checks. I mean, oil's been my biggest donator. And so I don't want to tick them off. I don't want to go down the road of, so the best way to make oil look good is to blame renewables. And then it's like they woke up the next day and find out there's actually farmers in Texas. So the political side of all of this, that's playing out on a national scale, it has to be different than what's happening locally. Have you heard anything from the person in Texas that all they wanted was their power to stay on? And now not only did their power not stay on, and their structure's been damaged, but their bill's going up. And so is there any pushback from the people of Texas at all?
I've seen some. I mean, there were some bills that were introduced to the legislature in Texas this year. I'm not sure of the status of those, but there's definitely movement from Texas, from the left, and also some bipartisan movement to create a better system for Texas so that this doesn't happen. And what we're seeing at the business level, like I was saying, besides policy at the utility level, is they're actually investing in battery storage and weatherization, which is a good step for Texas to try to mitigate this from happening. And battery storage is great just for creating a reliable grid. We'll be seeing more and more of that probably in North Dakota and elsewhere as our grid modernizes and slowly transitions off fossil fuel resources. Because obviously you'll have to store energy as well if you have renewables on the grid. So, and until then, we're going to need some fossil fuel resources like natural gas and others to shore up the supply. But the big debate right now, Joel, is reliability. Besides this stuff with Texas, and one side wants to just go back to the last century's energy and just let's go all in on the fossils, rather than trying to create a more diverse grid. So what we're looking at, as an organization, Dakota Resource Council, we like to push a diversified grid with battery storage and essentially a slow transition. So just kind of our perspective on that. And I think that's what's actually happening in Texas to some degree, even though it is like you said, an oil state.
Scott, one more thing in relation to the power and the power grid itself. When you take a look at where America generates its power, I had Commerce, the head of the Department of Commerce, Mr. Lamont, on today on my radio show, and we got into a serious debate because he was talking about it's not regulation, it's innovation. And I made the argument that, okay, you can say that all you want, but until certain things were regulated in terms of percentages, in terms of where we're going with our carbon footprint, the truth of the matter is you wouldn't even be having the talk about capturing natural gas and turning that into a liquid. And so I guess what I'm trying to get to in a long way with you, Scott, is what's the power grid going to look like in 5-10 years? And are we as North Dakotans just sitting there with our head in the sand making comments like it's not regulation?
I mean, I think the grid that we're going to see nationally is going to be a much more flexible grid with more renewables. In the short run, we're going to have more natural gas. What you're seeing in states outside of North Dakota is that they're investing in natural gas combined cycle plants and renewables, and then also battery storage. So you're going to be seeing that in a lot of the Midwest states that don't necessarily have a large coal resource or a large natural gas resource. That's what they're going to do, is they're going to transition to that. North Dakota, because of our lignite resources, are a little bit, we're kind of stuck in a situation where it's like, do we continue to use these resources, or do we kind of phase them out? And I think that's where the governor's office is, where they're looking at capture as an option. We as an organization are against carbon capture because of cost. And you guys have heard that probably a lot. Cost and feasibility. I just don't want to see a bunch of taxpayer dollars being spent on something that may or may not work when we know that batteries, renewables, natural gas, all that works. So my hope is to see that the grid's shifting to a more flexible grid. We'll also see more probably rooftop solar and things like that will create situations where households will be the ones putting energy back into the grid. So we'll have some more flexibility there. But that's like long term as solar gets cheaper and cheaper for homes. And then we'll see like likely transportation switch over to more electrics. So like that's what I would see the power grid switching to.
Scott, you're good at what you do. Where do people find out more about the Dakota Resource Council?
You can find us on Facebook, and we also have Twitter, and then you can find us at www.drcinfo.org.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for giving us your time.